I think it's clear why I think Sonic is such a good series by now. If you've been around my channel lately, you know I've talked about Sonic 1 and 2, some of the most iconic games in this series. They both came out swinging with aggressive marketing campaigns, a cool cast of characters in an attention-grabbing world, and satisfying physics-based platforming gameplay to back it all up. I really like these games, and while they're certainly far from perfect and have a few flaws to speak of, I can always count on them for a good time. With this being the third video in the marathon, you'd think it would be time to move on to the third entry in this series, the ever-beloved Sonic 3, and in any other circumstance you'd be right, but not for this series. Sonic 3 actually did start development just a few months after the release of Sonic 2, in January 1993, but it too would be plagued by issues that caused major setbacks for the team. Or rather, teams, since Sega Technical Institute had split into two separate groups, Japanese and American, due in large part to the infighting that had occurred between them while developing Sonic 2. They were disorganized and so wouldn't be able to get Sonic 3 out in time for the 1983 holiday season. This would be very bad for the series, however, since it would lose out on cumulative sales that could have otherwise been made, especially since Sonic's popularity was continually increasing. Sure, they also had spin-offs and other avenues like cartoons and comic books and whatnot, but not having a main game on one of their home platforms could spell trouble, especially since the SNES was starting to catch up with the Genesis' sales. Sega needed some sort of game for their flagship series out that year, and thankfully their wish would be granted by none other than the creator of Sonic himself, Naoto Ohshima. Over in Japan, his team had concurrently began development on their own sequel to Sonic 1, this time for the new Mega CD add-on, or as it's also known, the Sega CD. This peripheral could be attached to the bottom of your Genesis, or Mega Drive if you're not American, and allowed it to play games using compact discs, an emergent new technology that had just started to make rounds a few years prior. Side note, but it also had a second model introduced that had this real banger of a startup song. Figured I'd at least mention that, since when the hell else am I going to talk about the Sega CD? Interestingly, this CD-based Sonic game originally started as a port of Sonic 1 to the Sega CD, but gradually evolved into its own thing. This game would eventually become Sonic CD, which is yet again a very direct and no-nonsense title. I mean, it's Sonic, and now he's on a CD. Sega figured that this could be their big console release for that year, and also saw it as a way to kickstart the sales of the new CD add-on, and a means of buying more time for the development of Sonic 3. A seemingly good plan on the surface, but as you may already know, this is when the cracks started to form in Sega's console business. Many consumers saw the release of the Sega CD as the company admitting that their platform is weaker than the SNES, and that it needed extra peripherals to keep up. I haven't mentioned it before, but despite what its marketing said, the Genesis' only real advantage over the SNES was its slightly faster clock speed. By this point, Nintendo had demonstrated the capabilities of their platform with games like Super Mario Kart, which was able to produce pseudo 3D visuals without any extra hardware needed. To add insult to injury, 1993 also saw the release of Star Fox, one of the few SNES games to feature actual polygonal 3D graphics. Again, no extra hardware needed, it was all contained within the cartridge itself. Meanwhile, Sega was launching a whole new add-on consumers had to pay more money than the actual console itself to get, while still needing said console to use it. But hey, at least it had full motion video, am I right? The Sega CD didn't make much of a splash in the market, only selling a little over 2 million units throughout its entire life. Not even the release of Sonic CD was enough to save the thing from eventually being discontinued and declared a net loss by Sega. Despite this, those who played Sonic CD praised it, and felt that it was the one game to make the add-on worthwhile. The game was only ported to Windows 95, and was then later included in the poorly selling Sonic Gems collection for the GameCube, and that's it. For the longest time, it was seen as a lost classic that was really hard to get your hands on, because it was really. As a result, it developed a considerable cult following, with many calling it the best Sonic game. This conversation would pretty much take a 180-degree turn come 2011 though, when the game was given a wide release for the first time ever. Taxman and Stealth, two talented developers I brought up a few times already in this retrospective, had developed a Genesis-accurate game engine and convinced Sega to allow them to port Sonic CD to mobile devices, as well as Steam. While the port was praised for being the definitive method of playing the game, it also inadvertently caused a paradigm shift in how Sonic CD was perceived on a fundamental level. Many people started to question its legacy and shared more negative opinions on it, saying it was overrated or that it was never really that good, stuff like that. This mixed consensus is more or less persisted to this day, and you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who thinks Sonic CD is even worthy of being called a top 10 Sonic game, let alone the best one. So where do I sit on the matter? Well, during my initial playthroughs of these games, I had actually skipped Sonic CD entirely and moved on to Sonic 3. The reason was simple. I was fully dedicated to playing on original hardware and didn't own a Sega CD. Against my better judgment, I had wanted to get my hands on one eventually to play Sonic CD, but once I saw the prices online, Yeah, screw that. In summer 2019, I instead went the emulator route, specifically with Kiga Fusion, or Kiga Fusion, I don't know. The Genesis emulator I had used to mess around in these games with debug mode or some shit. I remember enjoying myself, but that was a while ago. For whatever reason, I haven't touched Sonic CD ever since, whereas I've played the other games more times than I can count. That makes CD an interesting game for me to review here on YouTube, since I'm so much less familiar with it than the others. Well, having played it again after so long, yeah, I think I can see why I rarely come back to this one. I wouldn't call it bad, it's just sort of there. Or in other words, it is certainly, without a doubt, inarguably, one of the games ever. From a story perspective, this game is kind of interesting. It more or less boils down to the same old Sonic vs. Eggman plot that's been there since day one, but with a twist. Sonic is seen running towards Never Lake, a place where a strange little planet called, well, Little Planet appears every December. Once there, he notices that the planet is chained to a mountain and appears to be infested by robotic animals. I want you to just take a guess what's happening. If you guessed that Dr. Eggman's at it again, you'd be right. Congratulations, you won the prize. So yeah, the Doctor chained the planet and he's attempting to use its powers to eventually take over the world, I think. I mean, that's what he usually does, right? Anyway, he's using the 7 time stones, diamonds with some form of control over time that... Alright, they're pretty much the Chaos Emeralds too, except they don't allow Sonic to go super. Eager to foil Eggman's scheme yet again, Sonic runs along the chain to the planet, and eventually meets up with one of the most beloved characters in the entire series. Amy Rose, of course! Yeah, this obscure game for an even more obscure add-on is the one to introduce this staple character. Again, I love how each game brings a new character to the table, it helps them all stand out from one another. Regardless, Amy is kidnapped by Eggman's latest and greatest creation, Metal Sonic, who is, for real this time, one of Sonic's most beloved characters. And honestly, I'm not totally sure why this game in particular made him so beloved. Call me crazy, but I just see him as yet another one of Eggman's robotic Sonics. Plenty he enacts in more than one game. It wouldn't be until a certain future entry where he would come into his own as a unique character, but whenever I hear people bring up how cool Metal Sonic is, they're almost always referring to his Sonic CD incarnation. I don't know, it's probably just the badass music he's known for, which, come to think of it, that is a pretty fair reason to remember a character. With all this in place, Sonic will have to free Little Planet's various zones from Eggman's control, using its bizarre time-altering properties to his advantage. As with the other games, this is a simple setup that gets the job done, but one which also has a little more effort put into it than the norm for retro platformers like this. It further stands out because of its intro sequence, which takes advantage of the Sega CD's FMV capabilities. It's an anime sequence where we see Sonic running towards Little Planet, witnessing Eggman's scheme and deciding to put an end to it. It's a simple scene, but action-packed and it has really solid animation. Although the original Sega CD's quality sure doesn't make it seem like that, given how damn compressed the thing is. Ugh, I mean, just look at this. Which, by the way, that reminds me, this game's aesthetics are really bizarre. The art direction is really chaotic and all over the place, and in many cases it starts to feel like an acid trip or something. Generally, the level geometry and sprites have this odd, uncanny detail to them. I find it really hard to put into words, but something about the visuals in this game is off. I don't find them unappealing by any means, just really strange and oddly off-putting in some way. I think it has to do with how stiff I find the animations by comparison. In the last few games, the color and life the sprites had overpowered their relatively simple animations, so I was never weirded out or anything. By contrast, Sonic CD's animations are seemingly more stiff and come off as far stranger to me. I feel similarly about the actual level aesthetics, which feel very random and almost welded together. I like the ideas on display, such as the sunny coast of Palm Tree Panic, the machinery of Wacky Workbench and Metallic Madness. And need I even mention Stardust Speedway? It's what you call a bandland, featuring a highway built out of large musical instruments. The actual sprite work then feels off in a way that's hard for me to put into words. Again, not bad, just alien feeling? I think. I mean, I guess that kind of fits, come to think of it. We are on a different planet in this game, after all. I just find the way the game looks to be really weird, and it tends to cause me some disorientation every now and then. But hey, I like the strong nature versus industry undertones here, especially when you see how bleak the bad futures of each zone are. They motivate you to keep on going and put a stop to Eggman's diabolical scheme, since allowing him to succeed would cause the complete ecological destruction of this otherwise gorgeous planet. Anyway, what further exacerbates that aforementioned feeling of disorientation is the level design itself. I guess you could say the disorderly visuals are, in a sense, a reflection of how the game itself was laid out. By this point, Sonic level design was more or less figured out with the release of Sonic 2. In that game, he had really come into his own as a series that's all about cleverly combining speed and platforming. Sure, there were still a few kinks to iron out here and there, but by and large, the formula for the series' gameplay had been well defined. Sonic CD, by contrast, takes a different direction than the first two games. It overall seems to emphasize exploration and searching through non-linear levels instead of speed and platforming. The game has no bottomless pits, apart from this one segment in Metallic Madness Act 3, and has stages with a whole host of branching paths. paths. This may sound really cool, but honestly, I have mixed feelings towards it. While I have praised the exploration in the previous games, I do not and never have considered it the core appeal of the series, nor the reason I enjoy it. It's more so just some extra spice to add replayability to the stages, which at their core were refined, straightforward experiences that were easy to come back to. Sonic CD, by contrast, has levels that tout exploration as their main gameplay element, which doesn't appeal to me nearly as much as a more focused Sonic experience. And above all else, they come off as really sloppy to me. For one, a lot of the set pieces feel utterly random, almost like they were placed in there because why not? In Sonic 1 and 2, every square centimeter of the stages felt deliberately crafted, with obvious platforming challenges that were clearly placed with intention. However, in this game, there is very little in the way of logical set piece placements. For example, someone on the dev team must have had a fetish for springs or something, because they are everywhere. And yes, I do mean absolutely everywhere. I mean, take a look at this place in Collision Chaos, a pretty apt name for this level if you ask me. Enemies and hazards like spikes are similarly very bizarrely placed, often plopped in there just because. A lot of times these two things can come together to make some annoying moments, such as when a spring sends you flying into a hazard that was off screen. This is the only Genesis era Sonic game to feature proper camera panning, thankfully, but it still has a bunch of blind sides, particularly of the vertical variety. I also find the levels to often be confusing to navigate, especially later on. As opposed to the previous games where the split paths were clearly defined, the ones in Sonic CD just kind of zip and zap all over the place, frequently overlapping and crossing over each other in a bowl of level design spaghetti. Stardust Speedway immediately comes to mind, with its absolute clusterfuck of a layout that's kind of a pain to navigate for me. I mean, if you take a look at this map, you'll see what I mean. Try and identify where each path begins and ends. I bet it's nigh impossible because it looks like absolute madness. Now, imagine trying to get through that while only being able to see a little bit of it at once. It's kind of a nightmare if you ask me, only made worse by all the springs and bouncy set pieces that ping-pong you all over the place. I simply don't get much enjoyment out of it, sadly. Despite this, however, Sonic CD has very little in the way of real challenge, and most levels can be sped through in about a minute each, if you know where to go, even in the more confusing ones. If you do this, many of the level layouts go in one ear and out the other for me. It's clear that exploration was a huge part of the design here, but that just isn't what I play Sonic games for, or at least it's not the only thing I play them for. As a result, Sonic CD's gameplay loop inherently doesn't appeal to me nearly as much, since it seems to emphasize that element over and above all the others. Also, like I said, a lot of the levels come off as really messy and disorganized to me, which further dissuades me from looking around. If the level design was overall more refined like it was in the other games, then yeah, I'd probably be more inclined to slow down and examine the environments more closely. But as is, I'm not. But then, like I said, the game becomes rather shallow when the levels last no more than a minute and a half or so. Another thing that certainly doesn't help in this regard is the janky mechanics in comparison to the other games. Whereas those titles had nailed down Sonic's physics to a T, in Sonic CD I find Sonic way more clunky to play as. A large part of that is how his spin dash functions differently from Sonic 2, which I'm used to. Instead of crouching and mashing the jump button to rev up, you'll instead have to hold down the button to slowly charge up speed. Releasing the D-pad then sends Sonic forward at a fixed speed. It's a minor change, but enough to mess with me. There's also the new Super Peel Out move, which can be charged by pressing up instead. It takes less time to do and looks really cool, with Sonic's feet going so fast they make a figure 8, but I find this move far inferior to the spin dash because it doesn't put you into the ball form when performed, leaving you open to damage. Thankfully, I was playing the decompiled version of Attachment and Stealth Remaster from 2011, which adds an option for the Sonic 2 spin dash, so this became a non-issue for me. Still though, I find that Sonic generally reacts to terrain in an odd feeling way that's hard to put into words. You'll have to play the game for yourself to see what I mean. I guess Sonic feels more stiff? I don't know. This doesn't make the game unplayable or anything like that, just really wonky in comparison to the others. However, I'm always willing to play ball with the developers' ideas. So how about we do just that? What exactly is your incentive to explore the level design? Well, remember how I mentioned in passing that Sonic 2 was originally intended to have a time travel gimmick in my review of that game? That system was scrapped, and instead worked into Sonic CD. I think the idea is really cool, but the execution is a bit lacking in my opinion. You have the choice of going to the past or future, and will have to look for a specialized signpost labeled with the one you want. However, there's practically no reason to go for the future, so the past is the one you'll want to look out for. Time traveling is initiated by running at a certain speed, and you'll then have to maintain said speed for a few seconds, after which you'll be warped to the past or future with a neat transition screen. To be honest, I don't find the act of doing this particularly enjoyable, and it's because the level design wasn't really created with speed in mind. I mean, hell, there's barely any slopes or loops throughout the entire game, and thus very few opportunities to gain enough speed. The developers seemingly acknowledge this, and on frequent occasions there's these sections that seem intentionally put in there to be an ideal time travel spot, usually being two adjacent springs that will keep your speed up long enough to warp. Personally, I don't see why they couldn't have just opened a gateway of stars you could have jumped right into, sort of like the special stages in Sonic 2. Sure, maybe it would have been too easy that way, but with what you have to do in the past, it would have been preferable. In each of the past segments, there's one of Eggman's robot generators hidden somewhere, which handle roboticization of the local wildlife. To create a good future for the act, you need to track it down and destroy destroy it, which in many cases is easier said than done. Sometimes the locations for these things are fairly clever, whereas in several stages, the clusterfuck layouts make it kind of a nightmare to track the roboticizer down. After a while, I started to find looking for these things fairly tedious, and so I stopped going for them. Again, I like when exploration is implemented as a supporting element in a Sonic game, but not nearly as much when it's the entire focus. And so this loop of looking for these things doesn't really appeal to me. Because of this, I find the time travel system to be a superfluous addition, not really adding anything to the game for me. So that pretty much means the good ending is out of the question, right? Well, not exactly. There is one other method to get it, and it involves the 7 time stones. Sonic can collect these as an alternative to destroying the robot generators, and doing so immediately results in a good future for all zones. As expected, these things can be obtained by clearing 7 special stages, much like the Chaos Emeralds in the previous games. Accessing the stages is done the exact same way as Sonic 1, by bringing 50 rings to the goalpost and jumping into the large ring that appears. I don't mind this, but honestly, I kinda hate these special stages. Admittedly, their visuals are fairly neat, using a Mode 7-like pseudo 3D effect that heavily smacks of Super Mario Kart, but the actual stages are a little too frustrating for my tastes. If anything, I like them way more than those in Sonic 2, since I can actually see what I'm doing this time around. You'll have to run around and destroy several UFOs, which float through the stage. Doesn't sound too bad, but my problem is two-pronged. One, the collision on these things is questionable, to say the least, and Sonic frequently whiffs through them even if the hit feels like it should have registered. Their hitboxes are deceptively picky, and you'll have to position yourself near perfectly to successfully destroy them. Unfortunately, doing so is a pain because the controls are really stiff and unresponsive. Sonic turns too slowly, meaning precise movement is pretty much out the window. It more or less makes it so each stage amounts to jumping repeatedly to orient yourself properly, which will more often than not result in missing the UFOs anyways. That's really nice when the stages have a time limit, and when landing in the water drains it like nobody's business. Overall, I got frustrated with these stages and eventually just stopped going for them too. In the fourth one, there was also a severe graphical glitch, which actually crashed the damn game, which was the nail in the coffin for me. Although this did demonstrate that the save feature is really generous in this port, saving the act you're on, so that's cool. Actually, come to think of it, Sonic CD was the first game in the series to have such a feature, even on Sega CD, a very welcome improvement. In general, I don't find looking for this stuff to be particularly fun, and I think it slows down the pace of the game to a crawl. It truly is a pick your poison kind of deal. The roboticizers are tedious to find because of the overcomplicated level design, and the special stages are annoying to me because of their poor control and collision. That's kind of an issue in my opinion, since this is definitely the most sluggish game in the series yet, even more so than Sonic 1, which literally had a speed cap. Thankfully, going for the good ending is completely optional, just like the Chaos Emeralds in the last couple entries, but not doing so leaves you with a fairly shallow experience that doesn't have much that jumps out at me. And when it does, it's usually because of an annoying stage gimmick, such as in the case of Wacky Workbench or Stardust Speedway, and that's the core dilemma of Sonic CD right there. It may be too simple to please people who prefer the any percent experience, while also being too bloated and tedious for those looking to fully complete the game. As a result, I don't find this game nearly as replayable as the other entries in the series, since it doesn't really have any strong appeal for me either way. If I try to explore, I'm annoyed, but if I go through normally, well, it's okay. The game is well above playable and not bad by any means, but not particularly interesting for me. But hey, I find it really funny how if you wait around for 3 minutes, this happens.
I'm out of here!
I think the US version of the game makes this Easter egg even funnier to witness, since the game over music is so disturbing after Sonic does, that. It makes me chuckle whenever I think about it, let alone see it. However, want to know what is absolutely not uninteresting for me? Well, it's something I literally just hinted at a second ago. The soundtrack, or rather, soundtracks, because Sonic CD has more than one OST. One was produced by the Japanese sound team, and used for the game in that country as well as PAL regions like Europe, and the other one was made exclusively for the NTSC version released in the United States and Canada. Most people tend to prefer the Japanese soundtrack, which I fully understand because it's an absolute banger, but honestly I enjoy both equally. In both regions, the tracks make use of real instruments, since it's a CD-based game and is thus capable of streaming the audio from the disc. Some tracks still sound more meaty, however, namely the past tracks. On the whole, the Japanese soundtrack places emphasis on really catchy and upbeat melodies, whereas the American soundtrack focuses more on atmosphere. A comment I saw that perfectly summarizes it goes something like, the Japanese version puts the songs in your head, while the American one puts an image in it. I'd say that's fairly accurate. Take Palm Tree Panic, the first zone in the game, as an example. In Japan, its melody is really upbeat and focuses on the bright colors present in the environment, complete with heavy use of brass and flute. On the other hand, the US version tries to encapsulate the atmosphere of being on a beach during the summer, using acoustic guitars, the triangle, cowbells, and generally having a more Latin American feel that I really enjoy. I also vastly prefer the US track for Wacky Workbench, with its catchy guitar melody. But then with something like Metallic Madness Good Future, I like the Japanese version better. It's this extremely serene, beautiful track that sounds like something that would play when the world gets saved from impending destruction or something. Also, I don't know if it's just me, but this song sounds like an audible representation of that nostalgic Frutiger era art style that's been the talk of the town on the internet lately. Fitting, because I swear the art design of Metallic Madness Good Future has elements of that aesthetic. Almost like it was a prototype of the style or something. I don't know, am I off base with that one? Whatever, point is, great song. Quite possibly my favorite track from across both of this game's soundtracks. I wouldn't say either soundtrack holds a candle to the iconic tracks from the first two games, and the next one we'll be talking about. But they're both solid in their own right and nice to hear while playing. One weird aspect, however, is how even in the American version, you can hear the Japanese past tracks, because they weren't redone. Speaking of those past tracks, I especially enjoy Collision Chaoses. It has this really pleasant atmosphere that just reminds me of, I don't know, being near a slightly misty lake around 10 o'clock in the morning on a sunny day. That's oddly specific, I know, but it's the feeling I get. Also, I would be remiss not to mention the elephant in the room, the most iconic track in the entire game. Toot toot Sonic Warrior, baby! So yeah, this is the first game in the series to have vocal tracks. You Can Do Everything, the Japanese theme, is pretty good, and so is the American theme, Sonic Boom. Although that's a pretty unfortunate name in retrospect. Also, keep this in mind for some of the later games, it's gonna become important. Oh, and, yeah, there's this kind of okay track, I guess, that plays in the Japanese version of Stardust Speedway's Bad Future. Alright, enough with the jokes. Yeah, the Japanese Bad Future track for Stardust Speedway is extremely iconic, and for good reason. It's a really good song, although I always feel like I'm gonna get a contact high when I listen to it. This was the song I referred to earlier, the one that makes Metal Sonic so well known, as it plays during the encounter with him. Also, in the American soundtrack, there's, this. Yeah, so enjoy your nightmares. Also, because I have nowhere else to mention it, Sonic's sound effects are different in this game, sounding way more compressed. I honestly don't care for these sounds, and much prefer those from the Genesis games. Nitpick, I know, just something I thought I might as well mention before the video ends. Speaking of which, why don't we talk about this game's ending and finally wrap this up, eh? I'm kind of running out of things to say anyways. After finally making it through the maze that is Stardust Speedway, you reach its third act, which, like any other zone in the game, is dedicated to the boss fight. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention the bosses. There's some creative ideas every now and then, such as the pinball fight in Collision Chaos, or the one from Title Tempest that sees you collecting a bunch of air bubbles to land a hit on Eggman. But all in all, these are some of the weakest bosses in the Sonic series because of their sheer ease of defeat. The first boss is an absolute joke, and the others are not much better. Whenever they do get more complex, they're usually more annoying than anything. Wacky Workbench's fight comes to mind, as it has some potential blind sides, and it involves a lot of waiting around doing nothing. The boss in Stardust Speedway unfortunately falls into the annoying category, which is a shame because it's a really cool set piece. It's the ever iconic Metal Sonic race, where you have to reach the room at the end of the course before he does, outrunning Eggman's insta-kill laser that chases you from behind. What gets on my nerves is the pace-breaking vertical slopes, which really get in the way. That's fine, you can just get good and learn to avoid them, but every time you die, you have to walk back over to Metal Sonic and watch an unskippable cutscene where literally nothing happens. At least there's an infinitely respawning extra life, reachable with one of the few moments in the entire game Sonic's speed can be used in a cool way. But because of how much waiting you need to do in between each attempt, I just got annoyed with the stage by the end. Anyway, after you finally win the race, Metal Sonic gets killed by Eggman's beam, who flees to his base. Sonic then frees Amy and sets off after the Doctor. Welcome to Hell, otherwise known as Metallic Madness Zone. Okay, it's not that dramatic, but seriously, this zone is kind of long, tedious, and I don't really care for it. It's kind of like Metropolis Zone, except a little less annoying. Much like Stardust Speedway, although to a much lesser extent, the paths weave in and out of each other in a really illogical way, which is especially true in the second act, where there's tubes and springs all over the place. The third act also puts in a bottomless pit, with the only one in the entire game, which just kind of comes off as cheap to me. I mean, the whole game hasn't had a single one of these, and all of a sudden they bring them back up for one stage right at the end. In addition, this one Badnik section should be really simple, but I swear the collision on them is really wonky and only registers when it feels like it. Regardless, we soon reach the final boss, and it's quite possibly the weakest one yet. It only takes 4 hits and has really simplistic patterns. I guess I'll take it over 3 minutes of waiting around for Large and Charge over here to attack, but it still doesn't make for a very exciting or climactic fight. At this point, you get one of 2 endings. Either way, Little Planet is freed and vanishes, but in the bad ending, Eggman also gets away with the time stones, and reverses time back to before the game happened, essentially creating a time loop. A clever way to canonize the bad ending, honestly. At that point, if Sonic failed to fully stop Eggman, he's time warped back to before it began. So you could just play through the game and try again. It makes more sense than just showing Eggman maniacally laughing with all the Chaos Emeralds in hand, since, you know, that kind of implies he took over the world, thus rendering the bad endings completely non-canon. In any case, this ending is honestly good enough for me, for reasons that should be fairly clear by now. Sonic CD is a really weird game, and for this series that's saying quite a lot. While I don't think it's a bad game, it's honestly just kind of mid in my opinion, at least in comparison to the high standards set by the previous games. It was an experiment that tried something new, which is admirable, but I honestly don't think it stuck the landing all that well, unfortunately. It has some bizarre jank not present in the other games, the level design's kind of a mess a lot of the time, and the side quests are either boring or annoying, and above all else, the gameplay loop doesn't really engage me, because it's either kind of underwhelming if you play the game while avoiding the optional stuff, or really drawn out and tedious if you try to get the good ending. I'm not saying that people aren't allowed to like it more than I do. Everything I've said in this review is just my opinion, so if you really enjoy Sonic CD, or even consider it your favorite game in the series, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Don't stop loving it as much as you do because of something I said. Hell, even I can sit back and get some fun out of it if I shut my brain off and stop being the filthy overthinker that I am. I just find that the game is a bit too much of a mess for my tastes, and as such it holds a lot less replay value for me than most other Sonic games. Despite that, I'd still recommend this game to those interested. Just don't go in expecting to be blown away is all, and I'm sure you'll have a decent time. So yeah, while I think Sonic CD was a little disappointing, that sure as hell doesn't apply to the game I'll be taking a look at next. I've been building up to it for the past couple videos, and it's finally that time. Following the release and underwhelming sales of Sonic CD, Sega was in serious financial trouble, and began losing market share to Nintendo's SNES. What didn't help was the announcement of new games for that platform, which sought to demonstrate its raw power and reclaim Nintendo the top spot in the video game market. Sega still had one trick left up their sleeve, the biggest and most ambitious Sonic game to date. However, things wouldn't be all so smooth, as mounting pressure from development struggles will cause delays, and even the division of the game itself. It's a story of suspense, drama, mystery, and okay, it's not really that dramatic, but it's a video I'm sure as hell looking forward to making, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this retrospective in the first place. Not the reason, I'll get to that when I get to it, but right up there certainly. So join me next time when I talk about the final Sonic game released for the Sega Genesis, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. That's all I have for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then. Peace.
It's no match for me!
Not again!